Israeli intelligence has played a vital part in the Jewish homeland's struggle for national survival. Since Israel's birth in 1948, its national intelligence services, loosely known as the Mossad, combined intellectual leadership with a ruthlessness that has impressed both friends and enemies. The Mossad has a worldwide reach. Its willingness to use extreme methods like kidnapping and assassination to pursue enemies is legendary. The truth behind some of the Mossad's operations is more remarkable than fiction. By the end of World War II, Jews throughout the world considered Palestine their homeland. But Palestine was then ruled by the British under a United Nations mandate that permitted only a trickle of refugees in. A secret intelligence organization, Haganah, chartered ships to bring in Jews illegally. The Royal Navy intercepted many of the Haganah vessels. They were packed with Jewish immigrants, many victims of the Holocaust. The refugees were shipped to internment camps on the island of Cyprus. In response, Haganah began gathering information on the British forces stationed in Palestine. It saw them as an occupying force. Violence between Arabs and Jews escalated. There was a succession of bombings in Jerusalem. The Arabs blamed the Jewish terrorists. The Jews blamed the Arabs. In May 1948, the British pulled out of Palestine. The UN General Assembly had already voted to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. On May 14, 1948, Israel's statehood was proclaimed. The next day, Israel was invaded by its Arab neighbors. It took more than 6 months of fighting and some 6,000 casualties before the new state could be sure of survival. A casualty of the war was the Jewish Intelligence Service. Under the leadership of Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, it was disbanded. Its functions were divided among 3 new agencies. Military intelligence was to be handled by a directorate known as Amon, derived from Agaf Modlin, or Information Bureau. An agency called the Political Department was formed within the Foreign Ministry. Its job was collecting military, political, and economic intelligence outside Israel's borders. A third function was provided by the General Security Service, or Shin Bet. It was headed by Isser Harel, who was given the task of coordinating the activities of the new agencies. Harel was influenced by post-war American intelligence, in particular the 1947 formation of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. This led to the creation of Israel's Central Institute for Intelligence and Special Duties, or Mossad, which replaced the Foreign Ministry's political department. Harel was appointed as its head in September 1952. The Mossad became synonymous with Israeli intelligence. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion promptly increased the Mossad's budget tenfold. The War of 1948 left Israel surrounded by Arab foes. Intelligence would play a crucial role in the new nation's political and military strategy. Israel's uniquely efficient citizen army was backed by an effective intelligence network. All over the world, people were available to provide information or spy on suspected enemies. In 1956, this network provided the Mossad with a copy of the secret speech denouncing Stalin made by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev at the 20th Communist Party Congress. The Mossad passed its copy of the speech to the CIA, which was impressed by the new agency's ability. The close ties between Israeli and American intelligence services withstood the embarrassment of Israeli collusion with France and Britain to take back the Suez Canal after it was nationalized by Egypt's President Nasser. The scene was set for some of the boldest operations of Israeli intelligence. By the early 1960s, Israel's Mossad had placed key agents within Egypt and Syria. The first was Wolfgang Lotz, born in Germany in 1921. His mother, an actress, was Jewish. She had emigrated to Palestine with her small son in 1933, the year Adolf Hitler came to power. In Palestine, Wolfgang became fluent in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. During World War II, he served with the British Army in the Western Desert. After the war, he fought with the Haganah and the Israeli army. Lotz was picked by the Mossad as the ideal man to infiltrate the upper reaches of Egyptian society. He not only looked German, his papers confirmed it. His cover story in Egypt was that he served with Rommel, not the Eighth Army. Lotz blended easily into the lush life of Egypt's international set. He ran a successful racing stable. The contacts Lotz made gave him access to Egyptian politics at the highest level. He gathered information on Egypt's armed forces and radioed it back to his controllers in Israel. Lotz was undone by growing suspicions among Nasser's Soviet military advisors that a spy had penetrated the upper reaches of Egypt's military. Lotz's radio transmissions from Cairo were traced, and he was arrested and tried in 1965. The Egyptians did not know he was an Israeli and could not break down his story that he was a German working for Israeli intelligence. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 1968, he was freed and exchanged for 9 Egyptian generals captured in the Six-Day War. Later, Lotz described the radio hidden in some bathroom scales. It was his lengthy transmissions that betrayed him to Egyptian intelligence.
These scales are used to transport and hide the secret wireless. These are 2 sets, one which I used and the other one which was spare. It is put in here like this, and now the set itself is ready for operation.
The second Israeli master spy of the early 1960s was Eli Cohen, the son of 2 Syrian Jews who emigrated to Israel in 1956. The Mossad devised the cover of a successful Beiruti businessman, Kamal Amin Tabet, for Cohen. In the Arab community of Buenos Aires, he successfully passed as an Arab. In 1962, Cohen arrived in Damascus, the capital of Syria. He began to move in wealthy and influential circles. He broadcast regularly on Syrian radio and joined the ruling Ba'ath Party. Cohen gave Israeli intelligence a complete plan of Syrian defenses on the strategically vital Golan Heights. Cohen also gave his handlers the Syrian order of battle and a breakdown of the Syrian armed forces' weapons inventories. Cohen was operating his radio when he was arrested by Syrian intelligence. Tried in secret, he was found guilty and sentenced to a public hanging in Damascus. The scandal in Syria brought down the government. Despite this setback, by 1967, there was practically no significant information about Israel's hostile neighbors that the Israeli General Staff did not know. Top spy master Meir Amit, who headed Mossad, and General Aharon Yariv, his counterpart at Amon, kept the Israeli government well informed. Working with them was Yuval Ne'eman, a scientist who applied his expertise to gathering military intelligence. Ne'eman had foreseen the key role computers would play in intelligence gathering and analysis. By the beginning of the 1960s, Israel had a computer-linked electronic warning system that rivaled the best in the world. The rewards of this sophisticated system came in the crucial opening hours of the Six-Day War, in the early morning of June 5, 1967. The precision and power of preemptive Israeli airstrikes launched against Egypt that morning were one of the greatest intelligence triumphs of the post-war years. The first wave of Israeli fighter bombers executed a plan based on detailed intelligence. The outcome of the war was decided within hours. The Israelis struck when the Egyptians were at their most vulnerable. Between 7:30 and 8 in the morning, Egyptian radar operators would be at the end of their shifts and tired. Air crews would be eating breakfast, aircraft would be awaiting maintenance, and senior officers would be caught in Cairo's rush hour. In just over 3 hours, the Israelis destroyed 300 of Egypt's 340 airworthy warplanes. With total air supremacy, the Israelis then annihilated the Egyptian armored forces in the Sinai. In less than 4 days, the Israelis broke an Egyptian army of 100,000, shattered the Syrians, and seized the Golan Heights. It was a victory secured by superb leadership at every level, thanks to intelligence of the highest quality. The Israelis made only one serious intelligence blunder. Their aircraft and torpedo boats launched a damaging attack on the Liberty, a U.S. Navy ship just off the Sinai coast. It had been gathering electronic intelligence on both Israeli and Egyptian forces. 34 American sailors died. In spite of the Liberty incident, the CIA saw the Six-Day War as evidence of the excellence of Israeli intelligence. This was confirmed in 1979 after Iranian revolutionaries took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Over 100 embassy staff and U.S. Marines were taken hostage. Embassy officials had attempted to shred documents, but remarkably, the Iranians pieced them back together. CIA paperwork among them stated, "Israel's intelligence services are among the best in the world, with an outstanding ability to evaluate information obtained from recruited agents, Jewish communities, and other sources throughout the world." 3 operations mounted between 1960 and 1976 illustrate the reach, efficiency, and ruthlessness of Israeli intelligence and its determination to strike down Israel's enemies. The first began after World War II in the revelation of the full horror of the Nazi death camps. Those responsible were to be hunted down. One of the Nazis most heavily involved in carrying out the final solution was Adolf Eichmann. This bureaucrat of death had signed many of the documents meticulously filed by the SS. Eichmann had organized the transportation of millions to the gas chambers. But amid the chaos at the end of the war in Europe, with millions of prisoners and refugees on the move, Eichmann had slipped away and disappeared. Some 15 years later, a Mossad squad slipped secretly into Buenos Aires. Their target was an Argentine businessman of German extraction, Richard Clement. His house was watched for weeks. Then, on May 11th, 1960, agents followed a bus Clement was taking home. As Clement waited for his connection, 4 men grabbed him and hustled him into a car. He was rushed to a hideout, protesting he didn't understand what was going on. Then the agents checked his medical details, put an SS cap on his head, and compared them to this photo. They had finally caught Eichmann. As Argentina prepared to celebrate its Independence Day, Eichmann was taken to the airport in a disguise. He was given the choice between instant death or standing trial, and agreed to go to Israel. He was smuggled aboard an El Al flight to Tel Aviv. The announcement of his arrest caused a worldwide sensation. After the war, Eichmann had worked on a farm in Germany for 4 years. He was then spirited away to Argentina by the Odessa Network, organized by former SS colleagues. Eichmann was put on trial on April 11, 1961. His defense could not explain away the wealth of incriminating documents and eyewitness accounts of his brutality. After an 8-month trial, Eichmann was found guilty and condemned to hang. Mossad's success in hunting down one of the world's worst mass murderers gave it an international reputation. The second such operation was the result of Israel's victory during the Six-Day War and the territorial expansion that followed. Displaced Palestinians were sent to camps on the west bank of the Jordan. These became a fertile breeding ground for Black September, the terrorist faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. On September 5, 1972, a group of Black September terrorists broke into the Israeli dormitory in Munich's Olympic Village. In the murderous confusion that followed, 9 Israeli athletes were taken prisoner. Others were gunned down in a hail of automatic fire. When the shooting stopped, negotiations with German officials began. The world watched as a tense drama played out on this balcony. Black September demanded the release of 200 Palestinians held in Israeli jails and safe passage out of Germany. The Germans agreed to the demands. The terrorists and their hostages were flown by helicopter to Munich's military airport. Waiting for them were marksmen from Germany's special forces who had previously taken their positions. The ambush collapsed in confusion. The captors killed all the hostages the moment they realized they had walked into a trap. Aftershocks from the horribly botched rescue operation would be felt for a long time. But even as Black September's victims were being laid to rest, the Mossad was planning retaliation. Aharon Yariv recalls.
The impact of Munich was strong. It shook many people that the manner in which our athletes were killed in Munich, in Germany, brought back memories of the Holocaust, of World War and pre-World War II misdeeds by Nazis. All this together with the feeling that Israelis are at the mercy of terrorists.
The Israeli government established a special committee, designated Committee X, chaired by Prime Minister Golda Meir and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan. The Black September terrorists responsible for the deaths of the Israeli athletes were to be ruthlessly hunted down. Under the Mossad's operations chief Mike Harari, several hit squads were formed. The first hit was made in October 1972 on Veol Abdul Zveter, head of the Black September operations in Italy. The operations were professional and precise. Police forces across Europe and the East never found the assassins. In a year, 10 targets were assassinated, all of them prominent Palestinians. But the Mossad made one fatal error. In July 1973, a Mossad hit team moved to Norway, to the skiing resort of Lillehammer. Their intended target was Ali Hassan Saleme, Black September's operations chief. But the man they gunned down was an innocent Moroccan waiter. The operation was a disaster. 6 of the hit team were arrested and tried. 5 were jailed. Aharon Yariv was appalled.
My reaction was, how should I say, I was dumbfounded. I just couldn't understand what had happened and why it happened. After all these operations that were carried out, can't use the word beautifully, but were carried out smoothly, just such a snafu, as the Americans say, it was beyond me.
Ali Hassan Saleme had been given a stay of execution. Since 1970, he had been leading a double life in the murky world of intelligence. Saleme was a contact between Yasser Arafat, leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and the U.S. government. This deal was made by the CIA to give the PLO a secret channel to the U.S. government, the ultimate broker of any peace deal with Israel. The beleaguered CIA in Beirut gained a top-level source within the PLO. The CIA was under no illusions about Saleme, or that it was acting against Israel's interests by collaborating with Saleme. But Salame's days as a backdoor peace broker were numbered. The CIA told him the Mossad was closing in, bent on revenge for the Munich massacre. Saleme, who repeatedly refused payment from the CIA, seemed resigned to his fate. On January 22, 1979, Saleme and his bodyguards set off through the Beirut traffic. They followed a familiar route. Saleme was becoming careless. A car was parked outside a taxi company that Saleme's convoy would pass. Saleme was under observation as his car picked its way through Beirut traffic. In a top-floor apartment, a Mossad agent began the countdown to detonate a bomb by remote control. This time, there was to be no mistake. Saleme and his bodyguards were instantly killed. The Mossad finally got its man. Emotions ran high at Salame's funeral. But in the harsh world of Middle Eastern politics, where life and death are often cheap, there was a reason for the assassination of Saleme. Aharon Yariv explains.
I'm not sure that killing a leader here, assassinating a leader here and there, will bring us anywhere near to peace. if it is a clear case that by removing this personality, you can deal a mortal blow to the other side that will bring you to the table, that's something else, but it doesn't happen very often. And now, I'm not ruling out the moral aspect. Here again, it's a question, if I'm very hard-headed, I can say, what is the benefit what's the political benefit in killing this person? Will it bring us near to peace? Will it bring us near to an understanding of the Palestinians or not? In most cases, I don't think so. But in the case of Black September, we had no other choice. We had no other choice.
In 1976, the Mossad faced another choice. Palestinian terrorists hijacked an Air France jet and flew to Entebbe Airport in Uganda. 97 passengers were held hostage. Most were Jewish. Many were Israeli citizens. Shimon Peres was Israel's defense minister.
We had to make up our minds between two almost impossible alternatives. One is to surrender. We could have seen the ugly face of appeasement in face of terroristic blackmail, and this is totally unacceptable to us. At least I'm speaking for many people, I'm sure. On the other hand, something that we highly esteem, the life of innocent passengers. It was a terrible choice to make, but I think we wouldn't fulfill our duty, wouldn't we try to see if there is any military option.
After protracted negotiations failed, a hit team of commandos flew from Israel in 3 Hercules transports. Kenya agreed to provide refueling on the return journey. The 3 aircraft flew low and close in an attempt to look like one radar signature and came in over Lake Victoria. Mossad agents had already confirmed the hostages were in an isolated old terminal building right of the runway. Their arrival was not questioned by Entebbe ground control. The lead aircraft turned and positioned itself for a quick getaway. Out of it came 2 Land Rovers and a black Mercedes, packed with commandos. Uganda's dictator Idi Amin used similar vehicles. They reached the old terminal building without confrontation. But as commandos raced to secure the building, Ugandan troops or hijackers opened fire from the control tower. The leader of the raid, Lieutenant Yonatan Netanyahu, elder brother of Israel's future prime minister, was fatally wounded. He was the only Israeli casualty. After a brief firefight, the building was secured and most of the hijackers killed. The hostages were rushed to an aircraft that took off for Nairobi. None were harmed, except for an elderly woman, Dora Block, who had been taken to a hospital. She was personally shot by President Amin the next day. The Entebbe operation, codenamed Thunderbolt, was the first defeat of international terrorism. Israeli intelligence and special forces basked in the glow of worldwide admiration. The hostages and their rescuers returned to Israel to wild jubilation. In 1973, cracks began to appear in Israel's intelligence services. Ayman rejected assessments of an Egyptian surprise attack as inaccurate. The subsequent Yom Kippur War almost destroyed the nation. During the 1980s, popular and political support for the Mossad and Shin Bet declined. They were accused of resorting to torture to combat the Intifada, the Palestinian revolt against Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. During these operations, clandestine Arab-speaking units codenamed Cherry and Samson had gone undercover to stop Palestinians. Uncomfortable questions about their methods were raised. Perhaps even more serious, Israeli intelligence placed its relationship with U.S. intelligence in jeopardy, particularly with the CIA, which had been supportive for a quarter of a century. In 1966, when General Mordecai Hod announced that an Iraqi defector had landed in Israel with a Soviet-supplied MiG-21, this information was immediately shared with the U.S. In the late 1960s, technical documents on the French Mirage fighter were acquired by Israel from a Swiss engineer. They were given to the U.S. and fed into the homegrown fighter program of the Israeli Air Force. But the U.S.-Israeli relationship was rocked in 1981. Israel failed to tell Washington about its plans for a preemptive strike on an Iraqi nuclear reactor at Osirak. The reactor was on the edge of producing weapons-ready material for the Iraqi nuclear program. Israel showed that when its national interests were at stake, it was capable of ruthless action. Even more damaging to its relationship with the U.S. was the Pollard affair of the mid-1980s. An Israeli agent, Jonathan Pollard, was unmasked within U.S. naval intelligence. In the early 1980s, Pollard, a U.S. naval intelligence officer, traveled to Paris, where he was recruited as an agent by LACOM, Israel's ultra-secret science liaison bureau. Its principal role was to safeguard Israel's nuclear weapons program. For Pollard and his wife, it was the start of a profitable relationship with LACOM. His initial reward was $2,500 a month, luxury holidays in Europe for the couple, and large individual payments. Pollard's Israeli contact was Raphael Eitan, head of LACOM and a veteran of the intelligence world. Pollard worked at the U.S. Navy's Suitland Center. His persistent requests for classified material eventually attracted his superior's attention. In November 1984, he was stopped with a bundle of top-secret papers. Pollard and his wife sought and were refused refuge in Israel's Washington embassy. They were arrested. Israel began a hasty and unconvincing cover-up.
The Pollard affair was an unauthorized deviation from Israel's clear-cut policy of not conducting any spy operation whatsoever in the United States or against its interest, the United States being a true friend of Israel.
The U.S. was appalled when it became clear that much of Pollard's information had found its way to the Soviet Union through moles in Israeli intelligence. This included data on code-breaking programs at the National Security Agency, the hub of modern U.S. intelligence. Pollard had also revealed the identity of many U.S. agents and contacts in the Arab world. Pollard was sentenced to life in prison. In spite of repeated Israeli appeals for his release, he remains behind bars. In 1986, another operation revealed the willingness of Israeli intelligence agencies to operate outside the law. In London, the Sunday Times printed a scoop about Israel's nuclear program. The source was Mordecai Vanunu, who had been a technician at the highly classified Israeli nuclear facility at Dimona in the Negev desert. The Israelis developed some 200 nuclear weapons at Dimona in a program whose existence they vehemently denied. The Israelis had not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and would not allow international inspection of the plant. Before the Sunday Times went public, the Sunday Mirror, whose proprietor Robert Maxwell had links to Israeli intelligence, published a front-page article intended to disprove Vanunu's claims. The Sunday Times editor, Andrew Neal, explains.
Subsequently, though, there have been further reports coming out. I don't know the truth of them, but there is at least worth considering that the proprietor of the Sunday Mirror, Robert Maxwell at the time, was very pro-Israeli, so were some of the journalists connected with the paper, and that this was an attempt to discredit Vanunu, perhaps involving the Israeli authorities, who by that time knew that we were going to come out with the full definitive report.
Frustrated by the Sunday Times' delay in running the story, Vanunu decided to fly to Rome. Unfortunately, he had chosen to travel with an attractive female companion named Cindy. Cindy was more than just a friend. She was a Mossad agent. Perhaps the Sunday Times should have taken greater care of Mordecai Vanunu. In Rome, Cindy's plans were well laid. A Mossad team moved into the city and began to trail the couple. Vanunu was overpowered in his hotel room, drugged, taken aboard a yacht, and transported to Israel. There, the former Demonid lab technician was tried in secret. When Vanunu arrived at court on the first day of the trial, he found a way to tell the waiting press what had happened. News of his abduction by Mossad was broadcast to the world's press by a message scrawled on his palm. In the trial that followed, Vanunu was found guilty and sentenced to 18 years in prison. The affair was an international sensation and did little to quiet concerns about the earlier misjudgments by Israeli intelligence. Soon those services would be faced with unforeseen problems closer to home. In the 1990s, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's determination to move toward reconciliation with the PLO split Israeli society as never before. Shin Bet failed to anticipate how far right-wing fanatics would go to stop him. On the night of November 4th, 1995, minutes after Rabin appeared at a peace rally in Tel Aviv, an assassin struck. Yigal Amir was immediately seized by Rabin's bodyguards, but the fatal shots had been fired. At his trial, an unrepentant Amir emerged as a militant critic of the peace process Rabin initiated with the PLO. Eerily, the crime was reconstructed. Amir had also intended to kill Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, but Peres left the rally by another route. Amir made sure he shot an unprotected Rabin. Shin Bet had had an undercover agent within Amir's organization who assured the agency that there was no need to worry. The agent was briefly detained after the assassination and then released. To add to its problems, despite instructions to the contrary, Israeli intelligence continued to spy on the United States after the Pollard affair. Its principal target was the American military-industrial complex. The aim was to boost Israel's state-owned defense industries, even at the risk of jeopardizing relationships with Israel's most loyal ally. Once again, the intelligence services seemed out of control. But it was not without successes. The Mossad could still act with its old flair. Canadian scientist Gerald Bull was a brilliant maverick in the world of ballistics and the brains behind the remarkable Supergun project. On his privately owned Caribbean proving ground, Bull created a real-life version of a James Bond thriller. He had developed an immensely powerful gun by combining two 16-inch Navy barrels. In 1966, Bull's gun fired a projectile 112 miles high. Bull moved to a proving ground on the U.S.-Canadian border. He boasted that he could fire a shell from Montreal to Mexico City. But he failed to impress the U.S. with the advantages of his supergun. He was willing to sell his ideas to any customer, regardless of the political consequences, which earned him time behind bars. There was a buyer for the supergun. Saddam Hussein, Iraq's dictator, had seen his nuclear weapons program at Osirak attacked by the Israeli Air Force. Saddam placed an order for Bull's supergun. Saddam had been impressed by howitzers developed by Bull and acquired by the Iraqis from South Africa and Austria. The supergun would allow him to reach Israel. The Mossad watched carefully. In return for buying the supergun, Saddam demanded that Bull help Iraq design a multi-stage missile using his old Russian-supplied Scuds. This was too much for the Mossad, which had been told by Bull himself about the supergun project. The Scuds were a greater threat than the supergun. The Mossad warned Bull, but he chose to ignore them. In March 1990, a team of Mossad hitmen staked out Gerald Bull's apartment in Brussels, the center of his arms-dealing industry. Assassins were waiting for him when he returned. He took the elevator to his apartment. As with Ali Hassan Saleme, there would be no mistake. As Bull emerged from the elevator and fumbled with his key, he was killed by 5 shots to the back of the head. No one heard the shots. No one was ever caught. Without Bull, the supergun project, codenamed Babylon, collapsed. 3 weeks after Bull's murder, British Customs seized sections of the gun barrels. They were being made in Sheffield by a forging company which thought they were petrochemical pipes. Gerald Bull had paid the ultimate price for endangering Israeli security. In the late 1980s, Israeli intelligence made a quantum leap in how it monitored its Arab neighbors. It launched the first of its OFEC satellites designed for high-resolution surveillance of the Middle East. For Israeli intelligence, the battle for supremacy had moved into space. On the ground, however, the Middle East remained a powder keg that demanded constant vigilance. Accurate intelligence, analyzed to draw correct conclusions and take appropriate and often brutal actions, is as critical in creating the peace in the Middle East as it was in making war. Territory fought over for so long has exacted a terrible price from Israel and its enemies. But as the century ended, the possibility of peace seemed to improve. For more than 50 years, the need to protect Israel from surrounding enemies made its intelligence agencies more ruthless than those of any other country. With the possibility of peace, they will need to adapt to a new and possibly more complex world.